Welcome to Golf Smarter Mulligans, your second chance to gain insight and advice from the best instructors featured on the Golf Smarter podcast. Great golf instruction never gets old. Our interview library features hundreds of hours of game improvement conversations like this that are no longer available in any podcast app.
You know, I kind of go against the grain of the industry now. All the clubs are designed on CAD-CAM, and you can tell that. Our clubs are tooling. The clubs go through a CAD-CAM digital process before they go into tooling. But I still make all the masters by hand, grind them out, and then just before the clubs go into tooling, I regrind the masters that come out of the computer, because the computer can never duplicate what the eye sees. And even though the computer can digitize my masters, it's never right. And I'm one of the few guys left in the industry that takes a CAD-CAM designed master and regrinds it, because I just don't trust what comes out of the computer. So I take a lot of pride that my clubs always look good at the address position. I'm a dinosaur.
With another interview from the archives of Golf Smarter, here's your host, Fred Greene.
Jesse Ortiz is regarded by some as the premier club designer in the world. In the late 90s, he created the tri-metal fairway wood and put Orlamar on the lips and in the hands of golfers everywhere. Jesse has custom-made clubs for over 1,000 touring pros, including Johnny Miller and Ken Venturi. Beyond his expertise, experience, and vast knowledge of club making, he's incredibly generous. When I told Jesse about losing my clubs earlier this spring, he told me to go get fitted, email him the specs, and come down to his factory. After I walked in, Jesse spent the next 2 hours building clubs for me. Welcome to the Golf Smarter podcast, Jesse.
Well, thanks for having me on again.
Yeah. Well, golf better last time, but now Golf Smarter. You'll get to more people this way. Listen, you know my plight. I lost my golf clubs. I'm without clubs. So I worked with a club maker to get fitted. We always advocate, get fitted for clubs. And he didn't want to record the process, and it's a good thing we didn't record the process, because frankly it was boring. We went out and hit balls for a couple hours, and he took notes, and it really wasn't worth talking about. But today, I came in with some numbers for you that meant nothing to me.
Right.
And we talked about it, and you wanted to help me get into the right clubs. Let's talk about what we went through and what it means.
Well, I thought what was interesting with the specs that you brought in, Fred, was I could tell you didn't have a huge ego, because I was surprised. I thought that you'd come in with a list saying that you need a 7-degree double X shaft and 7-degree loft double X shaft, something like that. But you had a 10. You're using a 10.5 degree driver. The shaft that was recommended for you was a high launch shaft. So right away I knew that, well, you're probably a low ball hitter. You might have trouble with fairway woods, as we discovered, in my interview process with you, that came to light. And, I saw that your spin rate was excellent, but, I thought that there was a shaft that I could probably recommend that would give you a little bit more launch angle. You were at about 12.5. I always like to see people somewhere in that 13.5 or 14 range, because you do get a little bit more distance if you can get it up, up that high. So it was interesting when you came in with the specs. I said, here's a realist.
Who's not very good.
No, not at all.
Well, I mean, and that's the whole point, is a lot of these numbers, a lot of this stuff that you talked about, I really wasn't sure what it meant. I just kind of quoted you what my club fitter, Dan, said. And so would just love that you really walked me through and took each club head. And, I mean, this is a phenomenal shop. We're sitting in your garage now. We call this the garage.
The garage is kind of like a little studio where we have a beautiful leather sofa here. But it's like a workbench area where I come in and think about designs, think about how I want to improve products, and kind of get away from the assembly area and the shipping area, and I come in here and do some thinking. But it was interesting, the specs that you brought in, and then we got into the fairway woods and into the hybrids, and and all that. And you were a relatively easy fit.
Oh, thank you, because it was a joy for me. Let's talk about these clubs on an individual basis. I want to start with the hybrids, because you made some really interesting points about how people perceive hybrids and how they use hybrids, and it sounded like you were saying they missed the point.
Well, nowadays, Fred, you can put the term hybrid on anything, and it's... the marketing people, you turn them loose and they put hybrid on anything and they sell it. Hybrid cars, hybrid shoes, hybrid golf clubs. In the golf equipment industry, I really believe that a hybrid is a club that should be designed to replace your long irons. It has no business replacing your fairway woods. A fairway wood has, there are design features in fairway woods that, make them perform the way they're supposed to perform. If you're trying to create a hybrid that takes the place of a fairway wood, you're going to run into performance problems. And in your case, what we did is we decided that we realized that your fairway woods, you have a problem with getting the ball airborne, which is what most golfers do. They have a problem hitting the ball off the ground. Most people are okay off the tee, but off the ground, especially in tight lies, you need a little bit more loft. And what we recommended for you was going to like a 3.5 or 4 wood, which is going to give you maybe just 10 yards less distance than a 3 wood, but you're never going to miss this club. It's got a little extra loft, 17 degrees. And a wonderful, wonderful club. I've recommended this club for many golfers who have trouble off the fairway, and it's changed their games. Really gives them a whole lot of confidence. We walked through, the face angles. We went through several clubs out of the box, several club heads, and picked out the one that looked right for you. And again, golfers, before they buy anything, should put the club on the ground and see if the setup looks good. If a club doesn't look good at the address position, you shouldn't buy it. I don't care what hype has been put out on the product. If it doesn't look right or comfortable to you at the address position, you shouldn't buy it. And so we went through some heads, found one that was square, because for someone who hits the ball low like you, something with the hook face does not instill confidence in you. You need something that's dead square, where you see some loft on the club face. And since our heads are also a little shallower, you could see that the ball was sitting up. It looked like it was on a tee. So, there's a lot of things that we can do, obviously, in a personal fit that it's tough to get when you go into a shop. But golfers should ask questions and make sure that they're fitted properly.
Absolutely. Also, what I found really interesting and like a complete buffoon when it came to it was the idea of, okay, it looks square, it looks right, it's a pretty look. I can see how I'd feel comfortable at that. But there's a whole element between that club face and me, and that's the shaft. Mm-hmm. Now, there is a lot of talk, and this is like the kind of nuance that I remember in the days when we were buying stereos like crazy. Mm-hmm. You'd get into the speakers. That's kind of like that element that brought you between your components to you with the speakers. The shaft are kind of like the same thing, and there's so many different nuances, so many different things about the shaft. I was blown away.
Well, yeah, in the old days, Fred, I'm going back to the early 70s. When I really was starting in the business full time, graphite was just coming out. And in the old days, you'd get graphite shafts and the diameters would be very different, and there'd be a lot of torque between one and the other. You could have a graphite shafted driver that you loved, and I would play with you and say, hey, Fred, that's a great, man, let me try this driver. It's great. I'm going to go get one made up the same way. And I could get the same shaft made and would feel completely different. Today, all the manufacturers have really dialed in the quality of the graphite shafts to the point now where there's all kinds of weights, all kinds of torques available, flex points. I mean, if you hit the ball high, you need something with a high kick point to knock the ball down. If you want to hit the ball higher, you get a low kick point. There's all kinds of nuances with shafts, and we went through several of them today. We talked about several, and in fact, on your fairway wood, that 17 degree, if you notice, I took an R shaft, because with your swing speed, I felt you were in between a stiff and a regular. So what we did is we took an R shaft, regular, tipped it half an inch, made the flex kind of like a semi-stiff, and it should work perfectly for you. So there's lots of little tricks that we do, and things that are done on the tour that the average golfer really doesn't know about.
Was that another case of my ego not getting in the way, going, no, I need stiff. I need to, what would be the problem if I said, no, I have to have a stiff? What's going to be the downside of getting something like that? Obviously we laughed about, hey, we're getting older, not younger. And
that's right. Well, most golfers really would benefit from having a shaft that's a little bit softer, particularly in fairway woods and in hybrids, because what you really want to do with those clubs is swing them for control more so than for distance. So, if you go with something a little softer, you don't have to swing as hard, and the ball has a tendency to get up higher with the softer shaft. High is good. And a lot of people think, well, gee, I'm losing distance if I hit the ball high. No, that's not true. There's a difference between a high trajectory and ballooning. And when you go to the driving range, if you're hitting the ball and you see it go out and it kind of flutters up, that's a balloon. If the ball kind of reaches an apex and moves forward for a while, then starts to drop, that's a high trajectory shot, and that's what you want. That's desirable. But most golfers make the mistake of using shafts that are too firm for them and sometimes too heavy. Most golfers should use a lighter shaft on the driver, and that's what we did with you. I think the spec that came in was around 70 grams. We got you something a little closer to 60 because, again, Fred, you hit the ball a little bit low. A lighter shaft should get you a little bit more launch.
Let's get back to that hybrid question that I asked you.
Most golfers, they buy a hybrid and they think it's going to be the miracle club. And it can be if you use it right. The problem, Fred, is most golfers get a hybrid and they think it's going to replace their 3-wood or their 5-wood. And really, hybrids are designed to replace your 3, 4, or even 5-iron. So when golfers have trouble hitting my hybrid, the first question that I ask is, well, are you swinging the club like a fairway wood, or are you swinging it like an iron? And really, golfers should take their hybrids and swing them like they're 7-iron. Accept the distance. Accept the distance that the club gives you. Don't try to get a hybrid, a 25-degree hybrid that's designed to go about 175 yards. Don't grab that hybrid and try to get 200 out of it, because you're going to get into trouble. Go with your hybrids. Go out and test hybrids, and each loft you should mark down what distance you get in the air. What's your carry distance for each one of the hybrids with the smooth swing? And accept that distance. Just remember, swing it like a 7-iron, and you'll get a lot more control. The ball will go high and it'll land soft. But if you start swinging from the seat of your pants, you're not going to have much success with any hybrid.
And you should never swing from the seat of your pants.
Well, no, you shouldn't. We kind of got into the whole Pels thing there with wedges and stuff.
And we'll get into that, too.
But it was, but that's the biggest problem the average golfer has, the recreational golfer has, Fred, is overswinging. They just swing too hard. And if they concentrate on taking a 3/4 swing and trust that swing, they'll make better contact. And they'll realize that, yes, they may give up a little distance from when they actually catch 1 in 20 when they're swinging hard. But the game is about consistency. And the more times you can hit the ball in the center of the face with a controlled swing, the better results you're going to get.
You mentioned recreational golfer. Is the industry a little bit guilty in trying to convince the recreational golfer that they're about to be a tour player? With the products that they try to convince us to buy?
Absolutely, and no bigger example of that is the parade of drivers that come out year after year, or really in some of the cases of the big companies, every 2-3 months or 4 months they've got a new driver. We were just at the Hagen Oaks Golf Show this weekend. They probably have 55, 60 stalls there Fred, probably on my two hands, I could have counted the people who were using clubs that weren't drivers. Everyone was beating the driver because, wow, that's the most attractive thing, and everyone thinks, gee, if I get a great driver, if I can hit the driver, I'm going to really improve my game and lower my scores. When really they should have been trying, hybrids and wedges out there, because that's where all the strokes are lost. Is with long irons, the not being able to hit long irons, and then the game from 100 yards and in. So, yes, you're right. The manufacturers, we're in the business of selling hope. That's our business. And what's the toughest club to hit in the bag is the driver, but that's the club that attracts the most attention. But if golfers really spent time working on their hybrids and their short game, which I agree, I got to be honest, isn't as fun as banging 250-yard drives, they would improve their games. They put more time into the short game and into hybrids, and that's when you're going to see your scores really drop.
You talked about the ballooning versus high trajectory. You want to get the ball up in the air. Is that a geographic thing, though? Are there some places in the country where maybe you have stronger winds? Some places around the world, and definitely around the world, where wind is a bigger factor.
Texas.
And so you don't want to necessarily get the ball up in the air as much.
That's right. I mean, Texas, Trevino grew up in Texas, and he always said that's why he couldn't win the Masters. I mean, he said, because the way the course was set up really for people who drew the ball, and Lee used to kind of fade the ball. But really, Lee was a low ball hitter, and at the Masters, you had to hit the ball very high. Your approach shots had to be very high and land very softly. And that's why, Nicklaus used to say that Nicklaus could hit a 1-iron, as high as most of the guys could hit their 9-irons. So, it's very important to be able to play shots under certain conditions. But for the average golfer, they're really happy just to get good distance and moderate control. And today's shafts and today's equipment, it's a lot easier to dial that in than it was in the old days of the persimmon woods. So, I recommend everyone should really go out and try different brands of clubs. Looks, appearance, like I said before, is very important. Sound and feel is important. Shaft selection is extremely important, but the club's got to look right to you before you buy it.
Sure. And you even asked me early on, where do I play usually?
That's right.
Here we are in Northern California, and I generally play in my county and around the 9 counties of the Bay Area. But for someone who travels, is it a good idea, because of all the subtle nuances that you can have in various clubs, to have... You can only carry 14 clubs in your bag, but should you have 20 in your garage? Should you have a selection based on where you're going to be playing?
I think so. But I'm in the golf business. It sounds like I'm shilling here, but Fred. But really, I think people should have 2 drivers that they can rely on, and a couple of fairway woods. In your situation, you're playing in Northern California. Here, the lies are very tight. We have bent grass all over Northern California, so the lies are very tight. You have a 17-degree fairway wood, which really works well. Would that work well in Bermuda grass? If you're in Myrtle Beach, if you're in Palm Springs, probably not, because even though the fairways are tight, on Bermuda it's very springy, so the ball's always kind of standing up. You might be able to hit a 15-degree very well in those conditions. You're going to Colorado, you're going to play in Denver or something. Maybe instead of having the 10.5-degree driver, you can get away with a 9-degree someplace there. Again, wedges, same thing. You may want low bounce in certain conditions. You're going to be playing in Texas. You're going to be in Dallas. Tight lies, hard fairways. Maybe not much rough around the greens. You got to pinch it. You want a low bounce. So. Yeah, I'm not here advocating, buy 2 full sets of clubs, but there's certain key clubs that you probably want to have an option. A fairway, a driver, a fairway, and probably wedge options, depending on where you play.
Bobby Jones Golf has an interesting selection of wedge options right now. You have branched out beyond the driver, fairway wood hybrids, skipped the irons altogether, and went into wedges. And now you have a line of wedges that you've partnered with Dave Pelz.
Yeah, Fred, I just believe that I'm not going to enter into an equipment category unless I feel that I can make a difference in that category, that I can come out with something that is unique and very different and, in my opinion, better. I had worked with Dave Pelz many, many years ago when I was at Orlamar, and I learned a lot from Dave about wedge design, playability, and I learned from him that most of the pros on the tour were switching out wedges every month or so because the edges of the grooves would wear out so quickly. Because to get feel in a wedge, you have to use a soft metal. Soft means better feel, but the downside is that soft metal wears out very quickly. The guys on the tour get their stuff for free, so they can be changing every month, or in the cases of someone like a Mickelson or a VJ, every couple of weeks. They're Pelz disciples. I came to Dave with an idea to put a different face material in the body of the wedge, and it's made out of a type of steel that's got carbon in it, and it's virtually indestructible. So your first shot, your wedges will spin 3, 4, 5 years from now, pretty much like they do the first month that you buy them. And that's what we came out with. So I'm proud of the way the design came out, and I'm proud of the way that they feel, because that face plate, even though it's rock hard and it doesn't wear out, Fred, it's backed by a 3M type polymer. So that's what keeps the face insert in the body. And as a byproduct, that polymer actually acts as a shock absorber. So it's really a bonding membrane, but it absorbs the shock so much so that the club feels like a forging. So even though it's a face that won't wear out, it gives you the feeling of a forged club. And there's also some other interesting design features as we went through in the fitting with you. We go with bigger grips to neutralize the hands. The wedges are heavier than normal wedges, again, to kind of slow you down, give you a more deliberate stroke. You don't get the yips or blade shots with the wedges. You just trust the weight. Take your hands back to Dave's 3 different hand positions, the 730, 9, and 1030 hand position. Start the club down and let the weight of the wedge go through the shot.
And yeah, I found it really interesting to put those in my hand, put the wedges in my hands, because they are heavier and the grips are more substantial, and not in weight, but they're thicker. And so I felt like this would be the kind of grip I've even been thinking about. This is the kind of grip that I'm not going to have to squeeze, and that's a tendency that you probably have when you get a wedge in your hand, is you tighten up.
Any of the short shots, that's a problem. You take a look, a lot of the guys on the tour now are using these oversized putter grips. You see them, they're real big grips. Why? It's to really neutralize your hands. It's so that you don't get handsy or flippy with the hands. A lot of people don't, they feel that they don't have that trouble with their putters, but on wedges, how many times have we gotten fast with our wedge shots? And you kind of get flippy, you hit it fat, you chili dip it, you decelerate. Those are all problems that are really addressed with our wedges and with Dave's philosophy. Bigger grip. It's not a jumbo grip. It's a mid-size. You felt that it's immediately noticeable that it's larger, but not unwieldy. And the weight is heavier, but then it makes sense. There's companies that make their putters heavier. Why? So that you take a smoother, more deliberate stroke. Same thing with the wedges, particularly with chip shots. That's where these wedges really separate themselves from the others, because you can feel the weight, and after you practice a bit, you just trust that the weight of the club is going to go through the shot, and you don't have to help it with flipping your wrists and blading the shot over the green.
How much? I'm curious about your participation with Pelz, because he's an instructor, right? He's a coach. how much participation did he have in design? Was he verbalizing and conceiving, and then you had to bring it to fruition? Is that how you teamed up with him, or did he get in with saying, no, it's not what I want to do here, change this look, change this, on the actual mechanical design of the club?
Pretty much the shape of the clubs, that classic look, was left up to me. So, all my clubs, you saw, Fred, even the hybrids, they got kind of like a retro look, kind of like a clique from the late 1890s and stuff. I believe all the clubs, I really believe that the clubs have to look good to be played. You just because something comes out of a caddy design and it looks kind of funky, it's got all this high-tech stuff, that doesn't float my boat. The clubs have to be good looking. I can make good looking clubs that perform well. So I wanted to make a classic looking wedge, but it had to be high tech, because really wedges have been low tech for 60 years. I mean, today's wedges, the wedges that are out on the marketplace, they're forgings just like they were 50, 60 years ago. The only difference now with wedges is they're milling the faces. They're milling the score lines in to be perfectly boxed, and you have some perfectly flat faces. But really, we were the first ones. Dave and I at Orlamar were the first ones to bring out milled faces in wedges back in 2001. Now what we've done is we've put in a different face material, and Dave was very important in selecting the material that went into the face and the configuration of the grooves and the texture. The shape of the club, that was pretty much up to me. I did use Dave's philosophy of bigger grips and heavier weight because I believed in it right away. I believed, because I don't play, contrary to what people think, I don't play a lot of golf. I play rarely because I'm working too much or running around. I kind of want to, when I take a day off, Fred, I don't even want to see golf clubs, So, what happens is your short game really suffers when you don't play. And I've always been a very poor wedge player, but getting into Dave's philosophy with the 3 hand positions and the 3 or 4 wedges really cut down on my bad shots from 100 yards in. So, when I started believing into his, buying into his philosophy, it was easy for me to design clubs that would make him happy.
Interesting. And you talked about your design being a traditional design. I get the sense that you're a traditionalist by looking at some of the club head designs. How much of that is influenced, not dictated, but influenced by the fact that the name Bobby Jones is on the club?
Some, but not a lot. Our driver is kind of a triangular shape. It's kind of radical looking, but then it's got that toe of like an old persimmon wood. So when you look at my clubs, there's certain features that are kind of, newish. They're very modern, but there's still a very strong undercurrent of a traditional look. And it's just because I've been in the business for 40 plus years.
Exactly.
People say you don't look that old to have been in the business for 45 years now, or whatever it is. Looks are deceiving.
When you start
I feel like I feel like I'm beat up enough that I've been in it 146 years or something. But I just believe that classic shapes are with us forever, and I kind of I go against the grain of the industry now, Fred. All the clubs are designed on CAD CAM, and you can tell that. Our clubs are tooling. The clubs go through a CAD CAM digital process before they go into tooling, but I still make all the masters by hand, grind them out, and then just before the clubs go into tooling, I regrind the masters that come out of the computer, because the computer can never duplicate what the eye sees. And even though the computer can, they digitize my masters, my handmade masters, they digitize them, comes out of the computer, it's never right. And I'm one of the few guys left in the industry that takes a CAD CAM designed master and regrinds it, because I just don't trust what comes out of the computer. And so I take a lot of pride that my clubs always look good at the address position. I'm a dinosaur.
Well, you're still putting out great product, and I'm really excited. Thank you so much for your generosity on supplying me with these clubs. I can't wait to get out and
Don't
hit them.
thank me. They got to work.
Yeah, well, I'll thank you anyway. I mean, it was unexpected, and I really appreciate it very much.
You're welcome.
Listen, could we do another episode together, and we'll do it for the
Sure.
Golf Smarter members, where you answer some questions from
Sure.
listeners? That would be great.
No problem.
Well, thanks
I'd be
so
happy.
much for your time on this one, and tune in next week so you can hear more of Jesse answering questions specifically from listeners around the world about what to do with equipment and short game.
Thanks for having me on, Fred. Thanks.